St. Louis Public Radio brings you the essential voices and critical conversations you rely on all year. During our April fundraiser, we are asking you to support that mission with your monthly sustaining contribution. Your gift of $10 or $15 a month will make a big difference, and you'll get the good feeling of being an advocate for public radio. Give now at STLPR.org or call 314-516-4000. Thanks.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Later in the hour, we'll discuss the possibility of the city of St. Louis becoming a municipality within St. Louis County. We'll also preview Tuesday's municipal elections, which include big financial decisions for the region's local governments and competitive school board races. But first, the last day for candidates to file for the August 4th primary election in Missouri was earlier this week on Tuesday. And some of the contests are proceeding as expected, with several county executive posts and open state legislative seats drawing crowded primaries. There were some surprises, though, including State Senator Angela Mosley becoming a last-second addition to the Democratic primary to succeed St. Louis County Executive Sam Page. And last Friday, Republican Congressman Sam Graves announced he's not running again to represent the North Missouri-based 6th Congressional District.
And I've wrestled with it a little bit, and I think it's time for some new leadership, and I also have one more good career left in me, and it's time to pivot to that. I like to tell folks my father is 92 years old and he works every day of his life, and the reason he's 92 is because he works every day of his life. And so I intend to continue to work and find something different to do, and it was just time to move on.
Graves' decision means that voters in the 6th District, which stretches from the Nebraska border all the way to northeast Missouri, will see the first competitive Republican primary in a generation. And as Northwest Missouri State University political science professor Jessica Gracie explained to me, the 6th District will probably remain in GOP hands. Most of the sparsely populated rural counties have become solidly Republican since Graves took over the seat in 2001.
It's probably still not, super competitive, but maybe more competitive now that you don't have an incumbent running, right? Because the incumbency advantage is a very powerful thing, and a lot of voters will vote for an incumbent, but if it's a brand new person that they've never heard of before or don't have as many ties to or associations with, there's the possibility. I think it would still be a long shot for a Democrat to win the district, but not as much of a long shot as it was with Sam Graves in the race.
One of the reasons why Gracie is hedging just a little bit here revolves around, you guessed it, Missouri's congressional redistricting saga. To recap, Missouri lawmakers typically redraw districts at the beginning of the decade. But last year, at the behest of President Donald Trump, the Missouri General Assembly passed a new map that splits Kansas City into 3 districts, including placing all of Clay County in Graves' 6th district. There's a legal dispute over whether the submission of signatures to place the 2025 map up for a November referendum prevent that plan from going into effect. A Cole County judge ruled last week that the 2025 map is in place now, though whether that holds up on appeal is anybody's guess. House Minority Leader Ashley Awney, who lives in the 6th District, told me last year that the new map could backfire during a Democratic wave election, which is possible later this year if voters rebel over a sagging economy and Donald Trump fatigue.
Yeah, if we run the right candidates, if we have the right messaging, and we are out there talking to Missourians about what kind of representation they deserve in Congress, absolutely, this could backfire on the Republicans. It is not out of the question.
Missouri Republicans heard these types of arguments last year and passed the map anyway. And it wasn't just from Democrats like Awney. Graves consistently opposed dividing Kansas City among largely rural congressional districts, something he reiterated to me last Friday.
I think it's a dangerous game when you start doing mid-cycle redistricting. I just think that can backfire, and it's hard to tell when it all shakes out, when it's all said and done, if it mattered or not.
But let's go back to that 6-2 map for a moment, which is what Missouri lawmakers approved in 2022 that has 6 Republican-leaning districts and 2 Democratic-leaning ones. If the Missouri Supreme Court ultimately rules that the submission of redistricting referendum signatures blocks the 2025 map, then the chances of a Democrat replacing Graves go from remote to non-existent. That version of the 6th district is way more rural and way more Republican. No matter which map is used, Republican Congressman Mark Alford of the nearby 4th district said last Friday that people with name recognition in the Kansas City metro area will have an advantage in this race, especially since that's where the bulk of the population lives. The 2 main contenders so far are radio personality Chris Stegall and Kansas City Councilman Nathan Willett.
So I think someone who is a familiar name to Kansas City is going to have a distinct advantage, much like I did in 2022.
Alford is referring to how he used to be a broadcast journalist before getting elected as a Republican member of Congress. But to zoom out for a moment, Sam Graves is the 36th House Republican to announce his retirement before the 2026 election cycle. And some national prognosticators contended that this impending exodus signals that Republicans are not confident in their November chances. Graves, for his part, said that had nothing to do with his decision. Though, if the 6th district's general election is more competitive than usual, it could be a sign that House Republicans like Graves were heading out the door before a November blue wave. We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll talk with Joseph Blanner, an attorney and subject matter expert on the potential reunion between St. Louis and St. Louis County. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Roughly 3 weeks ago, St. Louis County Executive Sam Page caused a stir throughout the region when he broached the topic of bringing St. Louis and St. Louis County back together. And Page told me earlier this week that the community reaction to having St. Louis become a municipality within St. Louis County has been shockingly positive.
We've had about 10% of the folks say, no way, don't change anything. And about half have said, no big changes. We need to know more before we would agree to anything. And then another half have said something needs to be done. So we want to hear more. So it's all a glass half full or a glass half empty, depending on your perspective and experience with this question in the past.
The reason Page may be surprised here is that all sorts of different efforts to combine the city and the county faltered since the two jurisdictions split in the 1870s. But notably, St. Louis and St. Louis County voters have never decided on whether to bring the city into the county as a municipality. That arrangement would likely mean that St. Louis could still have control over many of its services, but potentially take advantage of county services paid for with a larger pool of taxpayers. Joining me now to discuss the increasing chatter of unifying St. Louis and St. Louis County is Joe Blanner. The Jefferson County attorney was Governor Mike Parsons' appointee to what's known as the Board of Freeholders back in 2019. He's been so invested in the history of the city-county divide, he's writing a book on the topic that he hopes to get published one day. Joe, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you for having me.
What was your reaction to Sam Page's surprise press conference a few weeks ago?
Well, I think it's a good conversation to have, and the conversation had been begun in 2019, and unfortunately, because of certain circumstances, we weren't able to finish that conversation.
Did you see it coming, given Sam Page's relative lack of interest in the city-county combination discussion in the past?
Well, I didn't see it coming from County Executive Page, but I have heard a lot of chatter in the community about this issue. And as a practical matter, there's been chatter for over 100 years now, so it's not surprising that we're continuing to talk about it.
Speaking of chatter, I used a very scientific method known as posting on my Facebook page, asking, what do you think of the idea of the city joining the county as municipality? And most of the reaction was pretty positive. For example, Andy Brown said, let's do it. We are better together. Hashtag STL Proud with the fleur de lis on it. Nick Kimball, who's a state representative who represents part of Southwest City, said, something along those lines must be done. It is our only way forward. But then there are people like Ron Cook who say, show me the cost-benefit analysis, remove the emotion. It really seemed like the devil is in the details here, correct?
Well, absolutely. There have been a lot of efforts over the years to modify the relationship between St. Louis City and county, and ultimately all of those arrangements have failed. So the devil is certainly in the details. It depends on what that arrangement looks like and whether or not it's going to be supported by city and county voters.
On that subject, where do you think the idea of St. Louis becoming a municipality within St. Louis County falls on the spectrum of proposals aimed at bringing St. Louis and St. Louis County together that have been proposed over, 170 years,
150 years this year.
Years. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say it's the most incremental approach that's ever been attempted.
Why?
Well, there have been a wide spectrum of attempted modifications, probably the most moderate of which was the creation of MSD, which was the only successful use of the Board of Freeholders. But there have been things like a district plan, which is a modified version of MSD, a bigger MSD on steroids, effectively. And then there have been things like complete consolidation of everything, including school districts. So there have been a wide spectrum of attempts, but there has never been anything as incremental as mere city reentry into the county.
What do you think would be some of the benefits of the city joining the county as a municipality?
Yeah, I think the single biggest benefit is the fact that right now you have these two jurisdictions, which, in terms of development and growth and things like that, there's competition. And so I think the biggest single factor is that St. Louis County then would have a direct interest in what goes on in the city. And it would create a direct constituency relationship between the citizens of the city. And so I think that that's something that would be largely beneficial, is that there would no longer be this competition between the two.
Do you think, besides getting rid of some of the city's county elected offices, which I mean, when I say that, recorder of deeds, license collector, collector of revenue, all which are elected positions in the city, and in the county, they're all appointed positions, and they're essentially under the umbrella of the county executive. Besides those, because those would clearly be the first thing to go, do you think the county could also take over things like the city health department or the city street department or the city's parks department, or even something as ambitious as like the city and the county police departments combining as well?
Well, I think if you re-enter into the county, I think it creates a different potential relationship. If you look at the way some of the municipalities in St. Louis County interact with county government, that is true. For instance, there are several municipalities that have the county perform the police function for them. And so I think it does create opportunities for those types of things to happen. Not that those things would be impossible right now, but certainly if the city of St. Louis was another city within the county, it creates greater opportunities for those types of collaborations.
I mean, one recent example that was just so glaringly obvious to me, and that the St. Louis Mayor Kara Spencer talked about yesterday, is the idea that the city and the county have two emergency management systems. And the county's emergency management system is very well regarded and well funded and technologically pretty advanced. The city's is not. And we saw that in horrifying fashion during the tornado. So the mayor has basically said she supports the idea of having one emergency management system for the city and the county. But it seems like that sort of thing could be done without the city becoming a municipality. We've already talked about MSD, which combines sewer systems, so there's not two sewer systems. Is that something that would, like emergency management in particular, would that even require the city to rejoin the county?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, we have lots of examples of that in St. Louis, such as, for instance, the Major Case Squad investigates, significant crimes, and we have a regional 911 system, and so there's sharing agreements between fire districts where one can enter another if there's a major incident. So there's all kinds of opportunities for collaboration that don't require changing anything except our willingness to interact.
Do you think that this plan of having the city rejoin the county as a municipality, would that actually save city and county residents money?
I don't believe so, and the reason I say that is because there have been several studies that have been done on mergers. We talk a lot about mergers and about creating efficiencies and economies of scale, but the studies tend to show that tax rates tend to go up and that spending per capita tend to go up. I know there was a study done by UMSL a few years ago that looked at per capita spending on local government services in Indianapolis, Marion County, and compared that to St. Louis and St. Louis County. And the spending was actually higher there despite their merger of their county and city government. So, I don't think it would save money there, but there are certainly other benefits that could be derived from doing away with those county elected offices.
Then my follow-up, you kind of walked right in my follow-up. What are those benefits? Is it just that you would have a larger pool of money so you could hire more people and get better people to, say, record deeds or collect revenue or manage a park system or something like that?
Yeah, I think those things are all true. I think everything that you just said are part of the reasons. I think part of the other reason is that over the decades since the Great Divorce, those county elective offices have been a source of I'll say patronage politics and things like that, and so those things have been somewhat of a hindrance to city government. And keep in mind that the budgets for those organizations come out of city government. So it's just in my mind, it's an unnecessary extra layer of government in the city that could be done away with if they were just another municipality in St. Louis County, who frankly handles many of those functions very well.
So I mentioned that you were on a body that is known as the Board of Freeholders. I keep using the word known as Board of Freeholders because technically it's called the Board of Electors, but everybody keeps calling it the Board of Freeholders. So there's a very specific reason for that sentence construction, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Can you explain what it is and how it could propel an idea like this forward?
Well, first of all, we don't use freeholders because freeholders means property owner. In the effort to consolidate or the board that took place in the late 80s, the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court struck it down because of the use of that term and said we have to use the word electors, and electors are people that can own property or not. But that process would be the way that St. Louis City would re-enter the county if that's the option that was chosen. The way that the Board of Electors, I'll call it, gets constituted is that there have to be a certain number of petitions signed in St. Louis City and County, and then once those petitions are signed, the county executive, with the advice and consent of the council, is supposed to select 9, the mayor 9, and then the governor is actually supposed to select one non-city county resident, which happened to be me in the last instance. And the reason for that is that person is a tiebreaker, basically.
Yes. Why did the 2019 version of the Board of Electors fail? And do you think that a future board that put any idea forward would face similar obstacles to what happened 7 years ago?
Yeah, well, what the motivating force behind the effort in 2019 was actually the Better Together effort. So people who felt like change needed to happen, but Better Together went too far. Those people went out and got the signatures to form the board, and the county executive selected his 9, and the governor appointed his 1, and Mayor Cruson selected her appointees, but they never could get through committee and never actually got voted on by the Board of Aldermen.
And I do need to interject here because I want to peel back the curtain on this. Mayor Cruson never liked the Board of Freeholders process or Board of Electors process. She was a big fan of the Better Together plan, which would have created a metro government to oversee the city and the county. And she was really unenthusiastic about this. So I don't think she put a lot of effort to get these nominees through. But also the board didn't like some of the nominees. So Board of Aldermen, that is. But continue.
Yeah, sure. And then, frankly, the Constitution says they're supposed to make their selections within a certain amount of time, and that didn't happen. And then immediately on the heels of that, we entered into COVID. And I think, basically everything shut down and people forgot about it.
Right. And there could have been a lawsuit over the fact that the nominees had not been approved. But again, COVID kind of shut everything down. So it seems like the Better Together plan, which would have, as I mentioned, created a powerful metro government overseeing St. Louis and St. Louis County, faced opposition on two fronts. The first was from Black political leaders who felt that it could sap away their autonomy and power. Has that always been kind of a big source of opposition, the African-American community that feels that a combined city and county could ultimately hurt their political standing because you would have a large majority white election jurisdiction after that?
Yeah, I think there was that sense because, the demographics have shifted in St. Louis City to the point where African-Americans are able to elect more citywide representation, whether that's on the Board of Aldermen or the county elective offices or the mayor or the comptroller. And so if you merged the two entities, certainly that demographic would shift and there would be a loss, or a reduction, I should say, in the voice.
I asked County Executive Page if he heard any concerns from Black residents about bringing the city into the county as a municipality. This is what he had to say.
I don't think that the city moving into the county as a municipality really impacts that. The representation in St. Louis County is not part of this conversation as it's been structured, but it may be drawn into the conversation later on if people start talking about it more. There are, 1,000 or so elected officials in St. Louis County, and I'm not talking about changing any of that. What I am looking for is a conversation on how to deliver services more efficiently. And are there partnerships that we haven't yet realized that will allow us to do that?
That was St. Louis County Executive Sam Page talking with me earlier this week. Beyond reacting to the county executive's comments, is it possible that bringing the city into the county as a municipality and allowing the city to keep its mayor's office, its board of aldermen, yes, there will be losses in Black political power because there wouldn't be elected county officials, but you could have a situation where, say, the St. Louis County Council expands, there's 3 or 4 more members, and there could be increased Black representation in the legislative branch of county government.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about reentry, you're talking about something that's materially different than what Better Together was suggesting. And so the concerns that voice might be diluted is very different when city government would remain intact, and the only thing that would be lost is those county elective offices.
And plus, St. Louis County, despite being anywhere from like a 25 to 30% Black voting jurisdiction, has elected a Black county executive and a Black prosecutor. And they, depending on what happens, they may elect a Black county executive again. So there is experience. When I make that argument, I am not saying that a white majority jurisdiction will not elect a Black countywide official. It just makes it harder in certain instances, depending on what the situation is.
Well, I think if you're talking about a Better Together merger, then potentially yes. But if you're talking about reentry, then no, I don't think it makes it more difficult.
The other traditional source of opposition comes from Republicans, particularly because adding the very Democratic-leaning city of St. Louis pretty much ends any chance of a GOP candidate getting elected county executive, prosecutor, or assessor in St. Louis County. Has that concern gone away, given that St. Louis County has shifted so far to the left over the past decade or so?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's where probably some polling would be in order, just to see what the general sense is. But I understand that would probably be an impediment because it would change the political makeup of the county.
We're talking with Joe Blanner, who is an attorney from Jefferson County and a subject matter expert on the great divorce between St. Louis and St. Louis County. So for his part, Republican County Executive hopeful Dennis Hancock, he's the de facto nominee because nobody else filed, by the way, is not a fan of when Page wanted to bring the city back into the county as a municipality, especially when St. Louis County has such acute budgetary problems.
I always liken it to when you get on an airplane and they give you the safety talk and they say, if the masks fall from the ceiling, put your own mask on before you try to help somebody else. We need to fix our own problems before we try to, hand them off to somebody else to solve for us.
That was Dennis Hancock, a St. Louis County councilman who is running as a Republican for St. Louis County Executive. I think that Councilman Hancock brings up another important point, that St. Louis County is going through budget Armageddon right now. And if this idea doesn't actually help with the budget problems that everybody's talking about, that could be kind of another strike against it. Is that sort of why there needs to be like a really deep financial analysis into this idea?
Yeah, I would suggest that that's correct. I mean, obviously the county is facing some budget woes, and the city has long had constrained finances, and so the old adage that if you tie two rocks together, they still won't float. I mean, that's true. So I think that certainly there would need to be a fiscal analysis to determine what the impact on both entities would be of a reentry. But I don't think that that this would be done solely for the purpose of fixing the budgets of either. I think that it would be for the other benefits that would happen. But yeah, a fiscal analysis would be necessary.
Before we got on the air and we had a pre-interview about this, I talked with you about the word merger and how there's such a negative connotation to using the word merger to describe St. Louis and St. Louis County combining for some reason. Even though my family has lived in St. Louis for over a century, I'm not originally from here, and I am genuinely confused why a word merger, which means the same thing as combine or unify, are very similar, provokes such negative reactions among people. Can you explain to me why that is?
Yeah, I think largely it's because we have a lot of very strong municipalities in St. Louis County, and even though we have a large number, and maybe we shouldn't have as large of a number, I think many of the municipalities are very good at what they do at providing local government services. And I think that when you start talking about merger and getting rid of people's local government, they react harshly to that because many of them like their local government. And so I think that's where, we start looking at other incremental steps that might have some positive benefits, like city reentry, because, that may not threaten people's local government.
So you basically see the word merger as kind of a synonym for doing like a wholesale consolidation of city and county services, even though, and I'm getting really pedantic here, you are combining county services. So from a definitional standpoint, this is a merger, just not as large as what is usually associated with that word, which I understand is a very confusing explanation, but it seems to be where you're going with that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, the words obviously matter, and, the connotation that people derive from words is important. So even though in a technical sense, reentry of the city into the county does merge county offices, it doesn't merge the city with anything. And I think it's important to make that note, because people's minds, when they hear merger, immediately start thinking of Better Together or the past iterations.
In the last minute or so we have, you mentioned that there have been some plans that have been put to a statewide vote, and that's what Better Together wanted to do. But it doesn't seem like in the past that has actually helped, because we're still divided, and there have been statewide votes on this. Can you just briefly talk about the history of that?
Yeah, well, there have been two statewide votes. There was never a statewide vote in Better Together because that proposal was withdrawn. But both of the statewide votes, the one that happened for the federated city plan in 1930 and the borough plan in the early 1960s, were resoundingly beaten down. And effectively the argument, at least in the 60s, was, we we, and I'm not one of them, but the residents of St. Louis City and County should be the people that get to fashion their form of government, not people who are in, for instance, Branson or Kansas City.
Joe Blanner is an attorney who served as Governor Mike Parsons' appointee to the Board of Electors / Board of Freeholders. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, we'll preview Tuesday's municipal elections throughout the St. Louis region. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Municipal elections often don't get as much round-the-clock attention as, say, hotly contested congressional races. But some decisions voters could make this Tuesday could have a profound impact on how St. Louis area cities are governed and financed. Tuesday could also provide insight about the direction of St. Louis area school districts. St. Louis Public Radio's Hiba Ahmad joins us today to talk about a closely watched election in St. Charles County to fill out the Francis Howell School Board. Hiba, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, Jason.
Let's start off with a very, 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 very basic question. What do school boards do, and why are elections for those positions often hotly contested?
Yeah, so the two primary functions of a school board is to pick a great superintendent and to provide financial oversight over a school district. But, these elections have become super contested only in really recent years. We're talking about post-2020 when, of course, the COVID pandemic happened and the protests for racial justice happened after George Floyd was killed. We saw this kind of big surge in these money coming into school boards all across the nation, where you had groups like Moms for Liberty funneling in money to support candidates with policies that would challenge books and materials in schools, push back on things that we colloquially known as bathroom bills, which would allow more gender-neutral bathrooms in schools for students and such. So that's why they've become pretty contested over the last few years.
It also seems like for the past few years, St. Charles County has been sort of an epicenter for these contentious school board elections.
Yeah, absolutely. Why? Yeah, Francis Howell, Wentzville, these are the school boards that have seen a lot of these book challenges, a lot of discussion about curriculum. Francis Howell, for example, went back and forth about including curriculum around African American history in its schools. Most recently has faced a resurgence of book challenges. I will say it is one of the few school districts in our area that is still dealing with some of these challenges around, quote, culture war issues. Some of the districts like Kirkwood and others in the county have not actually seen them in recent years, which is an interesting change. But yeah, it's still concentrated out there. I think one of the big reasons also in Francis Howell is that they have two political action committees that are putting forward candidates for these school boards. One is the conservative PAC, Francis Howell Families, and the more progressive PAC, which is Francis Howell Forward.
We'll get to some of those issues in a minute, but you wrote recently how there's basically two slates of candidates in this election, one that's deemed as more conservative and one that's less conservative. First of all, which people are running as conservatives and which are running as, I'll just throw out labels here, the more progressive or more independent contenders, just the not conservative slate?
Sure, yeah. So the self-described conservatives and who have been endorsed by this conservative PAC, Francis Howell Families, that is Jane Pushkar, who is a current sitting board member. She's running for her seat again. And Lauren Greenwood, who's a parent in the district. She has two kids in the district. And David Jaworski, who is a resident in the Francis Howell School District. And then on the, I guess you could say the other set of candidates, which have been endorsed by Francis Howell Forward, that progressive PAC, and the teachers union actually are Jason Adams, Sarah Dillard, and Kevin McGuire. All have children in the district and are active, participants in all these great, wonderful schools out there.
This may be a naive question because as a political reporter, I do understand that politics often gets involved in education policy. But how does political ideology affect what these candidates plan to do if they actually get elected to the school board?
Yeah, so I think it shows up in the types of policies that school board members put forward, let's say around how books are challenged or curriculum is challenged in the school district. You have also, it shows up in the ways in which I think they talk about other different types of policies. One of the things that's come up actually interestingly is the one-to-one technology, which is offering Chromebooks to all students in the district. It's been interesting how that has gone back and forth among the current board members and candidates as well, who feel like it's too much technology for students, it might be harming them, versus others who are thinking about it more through an equity lens, like making sure that every student has all the resources that they need to be able to get and achieve the learning and academic progress that they want to see in the district.
You mentioned that the National Education Association often gets heavily involved in these elections. So that's the NEA, by the way. Who are they supporting here, and what is sort of their interest in making sure that they have particular candidates win these school board races?
Yeah, so I think from my observation, every time I see a teacher union weigh in on a school board election, it's usually candidates that they feel like that they can have good dialogue with, and those who are going to really support teachers and staff that are represented by the union. So in this case, the NEA and Francis Howell has endorse McGuire, Dillard, and Adams. So those are some of the progressive and or independent candidates. And, I want to point out here, look, the teachers, administrators, these staff members, library media specialists, they're the ones who get caught up in the middle of all of these culture war debates, right? When the union kind of steps in, I think they're trying to keep in mind, hey, who are the candidates who are going to speak up on our behalf and listen to us and advocate for us when it comes to passing certain board policies or supporting, let's say, teacher contract renewals. So, yeah.
You ended up covering a forum that was put on by Francis Howell students, and only 3 candidates showed up. What happened here, and what was the reaction among the organizers that not all 6 candidates attended this?
Yeah, I was really proud. It was led by student journalists and across the Francis Howell High School. So the youths are doing well. Basically what happened is that Adams, Dillard, and McGuire showed up. But the other 3 candidates, Pushkar, Jaworski, and Greenwood, said that they had a meet and greet pre-planned at a local St. Charles County Public Library event that they needed to go to. And even though the students asked the candidates to please move it, or maybe we can move the forum, they decided to move forward anyways, and they put on the forum and they pressed the candidates that showed up about topics about school finances to book challenges. I want you to hear from one Francis Howell Central High School senior. His name is Michael Purcell, about how he felt about the decision.
I think it is honestly extremely irresponsible for the other half of the candidates to feel that it wasn't important enough to present themselves in front of the broader constituency.
The student journalist did tell me that they had sent a list of questions to all of the candidates ahead of the forum, and the board member Pushkar did send back a response on behalf of her running mates and herself, and you can find those answers to those questions on the student publication websites.
Before we go to another big topic of concern in St. Charles County, you mentioned book challenges multiple times.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what that is and how that process works?
Yeah, so basically a book challenge is that if you're a parent or a community member, you come across a book that is available in school libraries, and you feel like it's age inappropriate, or it's just something that a student should not be able to pick up and read through school, you can basically go to school officials and say, hey, I'm not cool with this. They make you fill out a form, and then a committee reviews it in the district, and it goes up to the school board. There's a really long process actually involved with removing a book. But yeah, those policies have existed for quite some time, even before it became a big culture war pressure point.
The other major thing on the ballot in St. Charles County and also in Jefferson County involves capping property taxes, which is very much connected to education policy in St. Louis. What is this idea, and why is it generating so much controversy?
Oh, man. Yeah. So basically what I've heard from school boards, they can't advocate one way or the other, but they have been making it very clear how if Prop RT, which is this measure that is on the ballot for April 7th, which would basically cap property taxes or freeze property taxes in St. Charles County, regardless of the age of the resident, right? School boards in St. Charles County have said, look, our funding is very much tied to property taxes. So if this property tax freeze goes into effect, it will really start to show up in our annual budgets time and time again, because as we have seen in school budgets over the years, the cost of salaries and benefits and supplies have just continued to increase as it does with inflation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, even well-funded school districts are dealing with this problem. Special school district, which has a gigantic surplus, is having to make a lot of cuts because the salaries for their very, 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 very exceptional staff have gone up. I may be a little biased there because 2 of my kids use SSD. But I mean, that's sort of the concern here, that there just won't be enough money if this property tax is capped.
Correct. I think in Francis Howell, they've talked about a $4 million deficit as soon as the next school year. Anything
else that we should be on the lookout for?
Look, I mean, it'll be very interesting to see the election results on April 7th. If, the candidates who do not identify as conservatives take all 3 seats, they will become, this will be a complete swing back in the other direction. You will have a board full of folks who are, have rallied against book challenges and such. The kind of those hot button issues that we've seen happen over the last few years, and it'll follow a national trend. So
Hiba Ahmad is St. Louis Public Radio's education reporter. Hiba, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
And check out our voter guide in advance of Tuesday's election by going to stlpr.org/voter guide.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wissentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.